So what's the distinction between fat oxidation, which is like the burning of fat, and fat loss for people? Is there a difference? About what people are getting wrong when it comes to weight loss. And
Mm,
one argument that I've heard you make that is that weight loss isn't really about food.
yeah. Funny, right?
Yeah,
Counterintuitive,
quite.
counter to the entire market of weight loss is that it would be actually all about the food, and that this market should be able to tell you, hey, if you just eat this, you'll be fine. Um, I personally lost 65 pounds. I've been keeping those off for over 10 years.
Wow.
And I was that consumer, right? Who just believed, okay, there's going to be this magic food plan, or if I only did this, I would be okay. But I was always then eating things that I didn't enjoy, I didn't like, and there was no longevity there. So eventually I would fall away from that food plan back into my old behaviors and habits. So, after years in the weight loss industry, years in behavior modification research, and years working with clients to lose weight, I really realized that it was never ever that I worked with somebody who said to me, oh, I don't know what I should be eating. Like they could literally lay out a day of perfect meals for me. Oh, I should probably have a yogurt and a berries for breakfast. I should probably have some salad and some chicken for, they could give me a perfect meal plan. But what they couldn't do was tell me what behaviors were standing in the way of them actually making sustainable change. So, knowing what to eat for breakfast is fine, but if you don't get up on time, if you consistently get up too late, if you consistently don't prepare, right? If you consistently stay up too late, if you consistently eat after dinner. These are behaviors that lead to weight gain over time. And so it was never the knowledge like around, or that they couldn't Google search what's the perfect meal plan. I mean, that's simple. The real work in weight loss is in examining your habit loops and the behavior patterns and your environment to discover what's triggering you to go through these loops of unhealthy behavior, then dismantling them literally one at a time. So it's a totally different process than people actually have been led to believe.
I love that. I mean, because ultimately weight loss, what it takes to achieve weight loss can be boiled down to uh, a very simple mathematical truth, right? Like create a sustainable calorie deficit for yourself. And I feel like everybody kind of knows that.
Yeah.
So if everybody knows that, how come we're walking around in a time where 2/3 of American adults are either overweight or obese?
Yeah. And they actually believe that by 2030, right, that's going to be critical, like 90% of our country will be. And I think the secrets around what the truth is around our environment at this point, and understanding a little bit more about your brain and how your brain works and drives you towards eating and overeating, and then understanding that we have a a food environment and food manufacturers who have been studying you and your brain for many, many years behind the scenes. They pay, scientists millions of dollars to understand what will get you to not be able to say no, to trigger you to eat, and then to trigger you to not be able to stop eating. So I think once I illuminate that for people and they start to realize there's nothing wrong with them, that like that's like one of my famous taglines. There's like nothing wrong with you. You just were never told the truth. You're being bounced like a ping pong ball all around by triggers in your environment and the way that people want you to behave. And once you start to notice, oh my gosh, wow, I am programmed to eat. Every time I see food, smell food, or even talk about food, we're programmed to want to eat food. That's just how we're wired. Your brain is wired that way to make you survive because we didn't have enough food at certain points in our development. So now we're in an environment where we see food, smell food, talk about food, watch food TV, have pantries, live in the Zoom world where I can go downstairs and eat in 30 seconds. I can have food in my hand, and I'm bored, and I'm in the same environment. So once you realize those triggers and that the hunger that you think you're experiencing is physiological, you will actually think you're hungry. You will have your mouth water. You might even have your stomach grumble, but you only ate like 10 minutes ago. Your body is sending false hunger signals. So learning that those triggers are occurring, that you can manage them, and seeing, oh my God, it's because I came downstairs and saw my kid eating a peanut butter and jelly that I then said, oh, I want to get a peanut butter and jelly.
Wow. Well, at this point, you've made it to the top of the mountain. You've achieved the holy grail of sustainable weight loss. You've worked with many, many, many clients over the years. You've written, a number of great books, including Target 100. But tell me about your own journey, your own personal journey. As I understand it, you've had your own experience with yo-yo dieting and the like. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I always want people to know when they listen to me. I'm coming from a place of truly understanding what you're feeling. I was an overweight child. I was in a diet program by the time I was 12. And I think what that does, is it sets you up for feeling like you're not good enough, right? Basically, something is wrong with you, and the whole world kind of tells you that this is something that should be simple. You should just eat less, like, and move more, right? So I think that set me up for a lot of sort of feeling like I was constantly chasing a better version of myself. So that sent me through this sort of diet spiral. I did, several diets. I lost 30 pounds, maybe 5 times. It escalated to 50, then it escalated to 65, just the way that we see this happening for people all over the world now, which is once they get into that diet mentality and the diet culture, that there is no reversal. It's a spiraling up. Each weight gain is more and more and more. So I lived that, and really experienced that, the pain, the emotional pain, the physical pain, and the guilt and shame that lives around carrying weight. So it's kind of become my life's work to illuminate, what's really happening for you, instead of like what's wrong with you and why can't you do this. But that there are real physiological things going on. There's real brain science that you can leverage to put this in your favor. So I think that's sort of at least a little history. I then, I was an actress actually for many years.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so as a professional actress, I have a master's degree in opera. I was in big Broadway musicals like Les Miserables. That just exacerbated, right, the diet mentality of being an actress and needing to look a certain way. When I finally left there, I went to Weight Watchers to lose the weight. I was just a customer there, ended up working my way all the way up through the ranks to executive level, where I was the celebrity weight loss coach for people like Jennifer Hudson and Jessica Simpson and Charles Barkley, Katie Couric, Al Roker, just really helping high level folks. That gave me a lot of exposure. But I never stopped leading the meetings on the ground level of Weight Watchers. So I was always helping everyday people. I was always working at weight loss myself. So I felt like I really was getting that insight. I stayed there for about 11 years. And then I started my own company and have been working in every single place that I could, that was an offshoot of the entire wellness sphere in my mind, but specifically in technology, because I really believe in the power of technology and science to change the course of what's going on right now. So yeah, so I've then written Target 100, and am now developing a brand new platform and way of thinking about weight loss.
I love that. I think, you've had the privilege of getting to work with some pretty household names. I think what separates them from average people is that the people that A-list or A-list celebrities, they're highly motivated because their livelihood depends on them getting in a certain shape. But average, we'll just, use the term average people who are not, or civilians who are not working in Hollywood, who are not singers, actors, um, they don't necessarily have that kind of motivation. And I think that it makes things much more difficult for them at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
that's where I think motivation is like, where motivation, motivation, inspiration, people who rely on motivation, inspiration, I think it's almost setting yourself up for failure. You have to kind of bring discipline, I think, into the equation. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
I love that. I like that we're talking about motivation, because motivation is like this mystery term, and people think like, oh, they're going to wait around for it. It's just going to magically appear. Or like, remember that time when I was so motivated? Why can't I get that back? Like, it's like something that's going to drop in on them. Right. And why can they not control it? I totally, I try to reframe motivation for people, and really teach them that sustainable weight loss is about identifying behavior shifts, and identifying what behavior shifts am I working on right now. Right. So maybe there are 3 small things you're working on. Like, I'm going to put my gym clothes out at night so that when I wake up, they're there. And that helps me. Because you're not going to wake up and just be motivated to go to the gym. Like, people think that that's what it's going to feel like. And I train people that know habit formation is a series of triggering a routine, understanding what the reward is from that routine, and also understanding that it doesn't feel good to change a habit. No one talks about that. Like, getting up and deciding I'm going to create a gym routine. It's not, it does, you feel uncomfortable. You don't want to do it. You're getting up early, but if you get up early, put the shoes on, walk out the door, go to the gym, the first week's terrible. The second week's less terrible. Third week, all of a sudden, it's like your brain is going, this is what we do. And it becomes your go-to rote behavior over time until you can't not do it. Where I think people fail is thinking that it's going to feel good and that they're just going to become motivated because they're so angry or dissatisfied with the way that they feel in their lives, that it's going to magically appear. It does not. It's just like work. You don't go into work and a project just gets done. You break it down into tiny shifts, right? Tiny steps, and you go and you move that ball down the field. And then eventually you get that project to a place where it is rolling and it gets completed. So I don't want people to live in a space of this magical mystery motivation anymore.
Yeah, I think you so eloquently described the conundrum with inertia, right? Like an object in motion wants to stay in motion,
Yes.
an object at rest wants to stay at rest.
Mhm.
And of course we also have evolution fighting against us,
Yes.
in the sense that, we're not really inclined to want to exercise. We're inclined, I think, more accurately, to want to conserve energy, and then of course to reproduce, to procure food, and the like. But exercising is something that goes against millennia of evolution. So how do we create healthier habits for ourselves?
Well, I think that everyone, just like I said, everybody, when I talk to them and say, like, name what you should eat, when I ask that question, tell me 3 small behaviors that are standing in the way of your weight loss. And they will immediately pop into, well, I'm basically, while I'm making the kids dinner, I'm eating a full dinner while I'm getting the dinner ready. Or, oh, I'm eating after dinner. Or I skip breakfast and then I get overly hungry and I overeat at lunch. I mean, they are clear as a bell. So I feel like if anyone's listening to this, jot down 3 small things that you personally know, like wandering downstairs at 4 o'clock when I'm tired and going to the pantry and foraging through and eating chocolate and then spiraling into the chips, whatever it is,
Hmm.
jot them down. Then examine, what could I do to change that? What could I do to trigger a new behavior? And I ask people to get their own attention, because what a lot of people don't understand is that once you create a habit, it moves to a back portion of your brain where you're really not conscious that you're doing it. So halfway through being in the pantry, you're like, oh, darn myself, why did I do this? You weren't even there for the whole trip down the stairs, you're kind of like thinking about work, or you're thinking about whatever's happening in your day. And then all of a sudden you get there, you start eating, and you don't wake up until it's halfway over. So I'll say to someone, you know what? Close the door to your pantry, put a giant post-it note, a big bright pink post-it note that says no snacking today. Because if you don't stop the loop, it's like being on the road and driving somewhere and getting there because you've driven there so many times. You go, oh, how did I even get here? I wasn't even present for that. So I really encourage people to begin to think, how can I either, trigger myself not to do something or trigger myself to do something, creating a new routine. And you'll get down there and your whole brain and your whole body will be like, no, but it is 4 o'clock. I need a snack. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm this. And it's going to be highly uncomfortable. And that's when you need to learn to sort of really push into the new routine, right? Put the gym clothes on, go. I don't care if you go to the gym for 5 minutes, because what you're doing is creating the routine of putting the clothes on, walking out the door and getting there. And then, same thing with the 4 o'clock snack. I don't care if the biggest win for you was that you got down there, you walked outside, you took 5 deep breaths, but you couldn't get past it. You still wanted the snack, but you're going to say that for the first week, that's all I'm capable of. And next week, I'm going to walk out the door 5 steps and around the block and divert and continue to divert and divert and divert until your body no longer tells you, the brain no longer says at 4 o'clock, it doesn't put you in the loop where you're totally unconscious to go downstairs and do this. So I hope I'm being super clear that you've got to have a trigger, then you have to follow through, even though there is discomfort. Understand that if you're uncomfortable, you're doing it right. That's the part.
So well put. I think one of the major reasons why people, or I'll just speak for myself, I tend to want to snack either when I'm bored or when I've had a stressful stimulus that sends me to the kitchen looking for a quick dopamine hit. So, in lieu of the snack, what can people do to satisfy either or both of those two motivators?
Yeah, and you're expressing something that is so important for people to understand, right? So I talked about physical cues, right? You could see food and want to eat it. There are other triggers. You just named some. Some people call it emotional eating. I don't love that term because it makes it sound like you were crying in a corner and like you were emotionally having food. But what you clearly stated was there is a payoff. When you eat food, there is a dopamine, serotonin release that takes place. So you've made quite a smart choice. You're feeling a negative feeling or even a positive one, because sometimes we do it in celebration mode. You've then figured out a routine that makes that negative feeling go away, which is your reward. So when sometimes just a thought or a feeling can become the trigger for the routine of eating. So I think where you also were very clear is what could I divert with, right? So I said that, or what could I insert since this routine isn't working for me? This routine is making me gain weight. What routine could I do? Personally, I can say I struggled during the pandemic because I had a very active job in and out of the city, carrying a book bag up and down stairs of New York City, running all over the place, traveling. And now I'm sitting in this room, and sitting here and not moving made the stress higher. And I'd go downstairs and I would either overeat or have a cocktail to take the temperature down. And it became a loop. And so, I realize, right, I see those loops. So I need people to understand and see themselves. There's nothing wrong with you. I'm not a bad person. I just created a really smart loop that was relieving my stress. Then I said, that's not going to work for me long term to stay in this loop. And I created the loop of put the leash on the dog and step outside and walk around do a 20-minute walk. So that's an example. Each of us has to discover what it is that will quell the feeling that we're trying to run from, right? So if it's boredom, maybe that is, okay, I'm going to call a friend. If that is, stress and anxiety, maybe that is, I'm going to get outside and take 5 deep breaths, or I'm going to stretch for 5 minutes, or whatever that is. So it's about identifying.
All super helpful. I've heard you talk in the past about the value of hydration to sustainable weight loss. Talk to me about that. Oh, there you go. Drinking.
Sure.
What is it? What's in the cup?
Just plain water all day
Nice.
long. Yeah. Yeah. I always say hydration is my superpower. We are made up of water, right? So in average, we're about 68% water, but our really important, like brain and heart and the things that really run our metabolism are over 75% water. So when you're dehydrated, I mean, a few things happen. Usually you actually crave food. Because if you think about it, if you think back to how we survived when we couldn't find a water source, we found food like leaves and plants and berries that had water in them. So we tend to feel hungry when we're actually thirsty. And when people don't understand the habit of staying hydrated throughout the day, they end up kind of mistaking those two. Also, your whole metabolic system, your whole system runs on water. So without it, you really begin to see a reduction in metabolism. So it is a boost, and you will find that energy and mood and the way your skin looks and all of these things, because you're made of water, it just sort of brings you into this space of just being able to handle stress better, sleeping better, like all of that stuff that might have made you eat now is reduced by X%.
Wow. What are some other acceptable ways of hydrating for people who, maybe get bored of water? Is
Mm-hmm.
sparkling water a good
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
second option?
Wonderful. I always say in my book, I ask people to aim for 100 ounces of water in a day, which I think like people think that's a lot. It's really actually not that much when you start looking at it. I tell people like you can count some of your coffee for that. You can count some sparkling water or tea because there's water in there. I try to get people to go about 70 to 75% true water, and then sprinkle in those other drinks that will bring you a little joy in your life. But hydration is my favorite pillar in my book because it is the clearest example of habit formation. You see me, I've got this bright yellow cup on my desk. I am so habitual, right, that I go downstairs, I get my little reading glasses, I pick up my computer, I get my notebook, and I fill my water. I'm not even present for that anymore and now it sits here and it triggers me all day, and it's sitting there and I see it. So I go, oh, drink it. Right. So it's a clear habit loop: trigger, routine, reward.
I love it. I love water. Drink it all the time. Also love sparkling water.
Yes, I love
I
it
love
too.
I love sparkling water with a little bit of, sometimes I buy a flavored sparkling water, like
Yes.
orange flavored sparkling water, and I'll put some, just like some stevia drops in through the can
Yes.
hole, and it
Yes.
becomes, yeah, it's so good. It becomes like a calorie-free soda. It's almost better than soda because most sodas are too, even diet sodas they're too sweet.
So sweet. And I've become the queen of a mocktail because like a little bit of kombucha, like a watermelon kombucha with seltzer, fresh limes, a few fresh raspberries thrown in there. And then, just really sitting with that in a wine glass was another way that I moved away from the need for a cocktail. Or if I was going to have one, it could spread those out. So I would have, my mocktail first, then maybe have a glass of wine, then I have a glass of water, then a glass of wine. So I'm so with you of like, there's so many fun ways to stay hydrated. So try to enjoy it.
Yeah, I love that. So a lot of people listening to this episode of the show probably are going to have come through the ringer of diet culture, having tried overly restrictive diet after overly restrictive diet. What do you make of those? What do you make of like the low carb, diet camp, the low fat diet camp, and where should people conceptualize situating themselves when it comes to, a sustainable weight loss pattern?
That's such a great question, and it actually hurts my heart to think about people going through that. And that was the purpose behind writing Target 100. Is I've been in the diet industry for over 20 years. I've worked behind the curtain in those in some of the largest companies in the world, and to know what I know now, and to wish to share with people, weight loss does not have to hurt. It does not have to be this massive departure from where you are right now. In fact, what the first chapter in my book is, it says start with breakfast. I can see is like, if people just say, I'm going to take a week and I'm going to focus on getting breakfast straight. I'm going to just outline 5 breakfasts that I like. Not that some other person outside of me, some RD who wrote this food plan with me not in mind. They don't know that I'm allergic to this, and I'm, maybe, I'm from this culture and I eat these foods culturally. They don't know anything about you, and they've just put this plan out there for you to sit down and go, you know what, I do. I love, um, you know, uh, avocado toast, and I could do a slice of bread and a little bit of cheese and some avocado and an egg, or, oh, I love Greek yogurt, and write those down and work on just breakfast for a week of things you like. And then you're going to actually see weight loss. I sort of have another famous saying of, I always say, just give me a B. I think everyone thinks in weight loss, you have to be perfect. And if you make one error, then you have made a mistake and you are therefore you're out of the diet. So you go running back to your old habits and behaviors because you didn't stick perfectly to that. And my teaching is always like, it was never about the fact that you had one out of the pocket meal. It was about the fact that you felt bad about that. You got the guilt and shame spiral going, which then actually, when we look at the brain under an MRI, guilt and shame highlights the reward system. So we
Hmm.
go feeling guilt and shame about having the ice cream cone to actually just saying, well, I guess it's over. I'm just going to eat anything I want because I already messed it up. And I instead teach really what I call the art of recovery, right? The art of recovering from a perceived mistake. Because it wasn't. No one gained weight from an ice cream cone. They gained weight from turning that ice cream cone into them being a bad person, which is all diet mentality, which is like the inability to be outside of black and white thinking. And I'm teaching gray zone, understanding that it's all about like saying, you know what, that's cool. I ate one ice cream cone. I didn't eat the whole carton and I enjoyed it. I was with my family. It was a beautiful summer day. I'm so grateful. I got a great breakfast plan for tomorrow morning. So it's so much more loving and easy and kind than the industry wants to make it out, because if they don't make it that way, then you believe you need them to understand your own success, and you don't. So my book is all about you writing your own weight loss program, which that's the one that sticks. When I'm eating the food I like, when I'm doing the exercise I like, when I'm actually understanding my behavior, not just trying to fit myself into some behavior that's been set on top of me, I can do that forever because it's mine. So it's a real juxtaposition of that diet industry and the control and the deprivation and the restriction that people have been made to believe they need to do. So, and being in the industry for this many years, like you asked about low carb and all this, I have seen it all. Literally, we went from carbs are bad to fats are bad to now, everything. And I don't even know what comes next. I don't know where we go after keto, right? Like just it's, whoa, but really figuring out and saying, okay, we just keep spiraling through this. How about if I spend time and really examine, for some people, eating a higher fat diet really makes them feel great and it's right for them. And people can spend the time and figure that out, that, wow, when I do have that eggs and cheese, maybe an omelet for breakfast, God, I'm not hungry for a long time and I have a lot of energy. Whereas some people really thrive on a little higher carb breakfast. So playing around and figuring out what you respond to and not just putting a blanket over the top and jumping on that next fad diet, because some of them are even downright dangerous. So taking back the control, I think, is really important.
Shout out to David Nurse.
Yeah, for sure. And we sort of agreed that 6 is a good number. We've done 25 of these, 25 people at these dinners before.
Wow.
And it gets out of hand. You can't really, have a legit intimate conversation with anybody. But the 6 of us participated in one conversation, so I think that's the number.
It's like a magic number, yeah. The power of 6. We it was very funny. We at dinner we had it was a quick discussion, but I thought it was a funny discussion to have with you about corn.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people sort of in like the keto community and even the Whole Foods movement that are like super anti-corn.
Yeah.
But I've said some things on social media that I guess like have left people scratching their heads. Like, I'm not against a nice corn on the cob.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Well, agreed. As the ancestral health movement has sort of evolved, it started in the early days, and hats off to Lauren Cordain and the anti-grain movement. I think Joe Mercola was one of the early anti-grain guys as well. But this idea that all grains are antithetical to health, all grains are bad for you, and so you talk about wheat and rye and millet and corn. And corn is considered a grain, which it is. It's a grass seed. However, when we talk about the properties of corn that we're not that wild about, the lectins and the phytates and the tightly wound zyme, the tightly wound proteins, we're typically speaking about the grain product that's derived from corn that's used to make processed goods that you would find in cookies and crackers and corn and bread and things like that. But sweet corn is it's more of a vegetable in that vegetable category than it is in that grain category. And I'm from Maine, and really, a Maine clam bake was lobster, clams, and corn. And it wasn't a clam bake or a lobster bake without corn.
Without the corn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like, I think a lot of people have seen that documentary King Corn, and just the overall, the fact that corn today is in everything.
Yeah.
And that's I think a problem. But like, if you're metabolically healthy and you're metabolically flexible, which is something that I'm going to talk to you about, I don't see any problem with having like a nice organic corn on the cob in the summer. I mean, it's not, like alongside your ribeye or whatever it is that you're eating,
So, my take from the beginning has been that all these foods that we talk about exist on a spectrum.
Yeah.
And some are wonderful and fabulous and fantastic for you, and some of them aren't that good. And for some people who have certain sensitivities, whether it's nightshades or whether it's a gluten sensitivity, some foods can be, damaging and life-altering if they go down that path. But in between, there are a lot of places that we can play.
Yeah.
And I like to look at every food sort of, for its own merit. So, we can talk about sulforaphanes, right? We can talk about broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and all of the purported benefits that they have, and yet some people have issues with these types of food. So at the end of the day, we are all kind of an experiment of one. What I've offered with the Primal Blueprint, and I know you have with Genius Foods, is a template. And from that template, play around and experiment and observe and notice how you feel. And that's really, when this is all said and done, this is about enjoying life.
Yeah.
We are here to enjoy life. And if part of enjoying life is having great food with great company and great conversation, if great food can involve the widest variety of taste sensations, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I really appreciate that message of balance. Because I feel like in the nutrition community, what we see is like there's all these factions, right? And they tend to be very religious about like their nutritional ideology. Whether it's vegans or carnivores or people who are like strict paleo. And so, yeah, I really appreciate the more experience I have and the more exposure that I have to the sort of internet nutrition world, the more I appreciate like messages like yours.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. So metabolic flexibility is a term that you hear come up a lot, and you talk a lot about it. And I think there's a lot of sort of like confusion about what that means, what it implies. What is metabolic flexibility?
Well, metabolic flexibility is this capacity that the human body has to extract energy from from a variety of different energy substrates. If you are metabolically flexible, you can derive energy from the fat that's stored on your ass or your hips or your thighs. Or
What are you
belly.
trying to say, Mark? What are you trying to say?
Not you in particular, but ones.
Yes.
Metabolic flexibility not only means burning off stored body fat, but being able to combust the food on your plate, the fats on your plate, the carbohydrates on your plate, convert them to glucose, burn that glucose in the bloodstream for fuel, burn the glycogen that the glucose becomes in the muscles or the liver for fuel. It involves, in the absence of glucose, the liver's ability to make ketones and use ketones for fuel. So if you're metabolically flexible, you not only derive energy from all these different substrates, the best part of it is it's fluid. It doesn't, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to be conscious about, oh, I ate this and now I can only do these types of activities. The body adapts in a way that is seamless and doesn't care whether you got the fat from your plate of food or from your hips. Doesn't care whether the glucose came from a slab of bread that you just ate or the glycogen in your muscles. And it doesn't even, in many cases, doesn't even know. That glucose is in the bloodstream, it's available, the muscles can use it. So the metabolic flexibility part of this, which seems to be kind of intuitively obvious to a lot of people, the problem is, throughout our lives, while we have this genetic wiring that allows us to achieve metabolic flexibility, our food choices from very early on, typically dictated by our parents in the first place, have kind of led us down this path of carbohydrate dependency. And so when the body is presented with a lot of carbohydrate, the carbohydrate converts to glucose. The body doesn't like to have a lot of glucose in the bloodstream at any one time. There are a couple of mechanisms to get rid of it. One is to convert it to glycogen in the muscles. If the muscles are full of glycogen, another strategy is to send it to the fat cells and store that as triglycerides or fat in the fat cells. And ultimately, the body does what it can to try and rid itself of excess glucose. And that's fine. We know all of us are very good at burning glucose, but glucose doesn't require the metabolic machinery that fats do. So you don't really have to have a lot of mitochondrial activity for muscles to burn glucose. It'll happen in the cytosol or the center of the cell.
That's very interesting. You mentioned that the last time that we chatted, and I thought that was a fascinating insight. That so you basically like strengthen your mitochondria by burning fat in a way?
Right. So just to take this one more step down the path of achieving metabolic flexibility, when you don't cease to eat meals, in other words, when you eat 3 square meals a day and you have carbohydrate at every meal and you don't let yourself go 3 or 4 hours without eating, and typically that's because you are hungry or your blood sugar drops and you feel low and you need to have something to top off your blood sugar. That's sort of a typical scenario for most people of the last several decades who are carb dependent. When you do that, you never tap into your body fat stores. And when you never tap into your body fat stores, the body says, look, I don't need to build any machinery to burn fat because we're not burning fat. This clown is feeding me carbohydrate all the time, like every 2 or 3 hours, all day long. It's breakfast, the most important meal of the day, followed by a 10:30 coffee break, followed by lunch, followed by an afternoon pick-me-up, or else I'll have to take a nap, followed by dinner, and then maybe something while you're watching TV before you go to bed. And this is a problem with civilization that's made all of this food so available and so handy and so tasty that we tend to kind of rely on that. And as such, we never build this metabolic machinery. So the way to do this and the way to develop metabolic flexibility is to cut the carbs, is to reduce the amount of glucose that your body has access to. In so doing, a number of genetic signaling devices take place. And this includes more enzymes to take fat out of storage, what we call mitochondrial biogenesis, the building of more mitochondria, which is where the fat actually burns inside the cells. An improvement in mitochondrial efficiency, so even the mitochondria that you do have become more efficient at extracting energy from fat. And through all of this, a number of great things happen. First of all, you become able to generate energy all day long, whether you eat or not. So because we all have this ability to store extra calories as fat, this fuel that we carry around with us all the time. And as a result of that access to energy all the time, hunger, appetite, and cravings kind of dissipate, and in many cases, like almost disappear. You become so efficient at burning calories, burning energy in the absence of eating, that you can do 80, 85, 90% of the work that you would do in the gym, just burning fat, just burning stored body fat. So it's an amazing kind of adaptation that all of us have, and it's really a result of millions of years of evolution through a period of time when food was really, really scarce. When food is scarce, it's not like, well, you don't eat 3 meals a day, you only eat 1 meal a day. No, when food is scarce, it's like you eat 1 meal and then you might not eat for 2 or 3 days. And our ability to survive that sort of those harsh conditions relied on us overeating that 1 meal because we had no means of storing. There's no refrigeration, there was no smoking and other means of storing it. So we developed this system where we could overeat and turn the excess calories into energy that we carried around with us, conveniently located right above the center of gravity. So you don't even have to put your fuel in a 5-gallon bucket and lug it around or in a backpack. It's like a fanny pack, literally, right over your hips. And that's really one of the most elegant and amazing systems in the human body, is this ability to
store fat.
To store fat. And we all have that, to the chagrin of many of us. And really now the challenge is to figure out a way to be able to combust that fat, burn that stored body fat off, use it for fuel, not just to have access to energy all day long, but to achieve an ideal body composition, to normalize blood sugar, to normalize blood lipids, reduce risk factors for cancer, heart disease, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and all the things that we talk about. So in that regard, I would say that the pursuit of metabolic flexibility really is the holy grail of health. If you are metabolically flexible, everything else falls into place. Conversely, if you're not metabolically flexible, it becomes more difficult to try and work your way around it by exercising your way into that system or that situation, or taking medications. People are taking metformin for their blood sugar management, and sometimes they're taking statins for their lipid management, and these are all really kind of bass-backwards way of trying to reduce risk factors when in fact just achieving metabolic flexibility will get you there.
Did you say bass-backwards?
Yeah, I did.
I like that.
It's a word.
No, but it really sets up such an elegant operating system. Like the people who were our ancestors that were most efficient at storing fat, that got fat the easiest.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that survived.
They survived. They lived long enough to pass the genes along to the next generation. So it's literally, you can argue that, people will say, I'm fat because my parents were fat and I inherited that gene. Well, good for you, because if you go back far enough, that's the line of survivors and everyone else kind of died out.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just amazing. And the amount of energy that we can store in our fat, that for people to not be metabolically flexible, it's like, you're undermining millennia of adaptation and evolution and natural selection. I mean, I'm just going to do some math out loud. So you can store about 500 grams of carbohydrates in your body. That's it, right? Like about 100 in your liver, 400 in your muscles. So that's multiplied by 4, that's 2,000 calories.
Yep.
You can store 2,000 calories of sugar,
Yep.
In your body. But you store 3,000 calories in just a single pound of fat.
Right. Yeah, so I'm 10% body fat, and I'm 170 pounds. So I have 17 pounds of fat. So let's say some of that fat is necessary for other functions beyond fuel and combustion. So if I have 12 pounds of fat on me, times 3,000 calories per pound, that is 36,000 calories worth. That's enough for me to walk 360 miles without eating.
Wow.
And without suffering the consequences, provided that I'm metabolically flexible. Now, here's where it gets really kind of dicey. For people who haven't done the work to become metabolically flexible, they're still at the effect of this carbohydrate dependency. So if I go 3 days without eating, because I've done the work and I'm metabolically flexible, as I said, my body really doesn't even know that I'm getting the energy from my body's fat stores, and it doesn't care, and it doesn't. There's no ill effects from it. I still, because I'm making ketones, my brain is happy because of the ketones. I'm burning fat to do most of the work. That fat's already on me, and I have a lot of it, as we just described, even at a low body fat. One of the closed loop system concepts that happens as a result of not eating for days, if you're metabolically flexible, is that certain genes are turned on that spare amino acids and spare protein. So you literally recycle proteins much more efficiently, so you don't even need an external supply of protein during this time. You won't. So if you're metabolically flexible, you won't even lose much in the way of muscle mass if you go days without eating. Now, the converse of that is if you're carb dependent and you skip one meal, you get hangry and you get out of sorts. And if you skip like 2 days of not eating because you haven't done the work and haven't built the metabolic machinery, the brain kind of goes, wait a minute, I'm supposed to get glucose all the time. And you cut off my glucose, what am I going to do? I haven't learned how to burn ketones efficiently yet. And so the liver's pumping out these ketones, and you're spilling them out in your breath and your urine and your blood. And dude, I'm in ketosis. I'm 5 millimolar. I'm 6 millimolar. It doesn't matter. If you haven't done the work yet to do that, you're sort of wasting that precious fuel. So when you when you don't eat and you're a carbohydrate dependent person, and the body still thinks it needs carbs to run on and glucose to run on, then the brain sends a signal to the adrenals. The adrenals secrete cortisol, a stress hormone. And you've maybe heard this when people do inappropriate fasts and they haven't prepared for the fast yet, and their cortisol levels go up. Well, cortisol basically tears down muscle tissue throughout the body, sends it to the liver so that it can be made into glucose to fuel the brain and to do these activities. So you're literally cannibalizing your own body in a way that if you're metabolically flexible, not even an issue. But if you haven't built this metabolic flexibility, that's why you get into problems with carb-dependent people doing 3-day fasts and 4-day fasts.
And it's interesting because it's a lot easier, and correct me if I'm wrong, to create glucose from protein than it is from fat, because it's not as efficient, right? Because in fat, you can get the glycerol off of the triglyceride.
Right. And so in the model that I talked about, where if I were to go 3 days without eating, or our buddy Peter Attia, which he does routinely, he does 5-day fasts all the time. You can say this is such an efficient system because the triglyceride, that is the fat molecule that's being combusted, those 3 fatty acid molecules, they get combusted. Some get sent to the liver to become ketones, which is a fuel that the brain can use. But the glycerol can be used in the manufacture of whatever small amount of glucose is still required. So you can go days without any glucose at all, and the body will make glucose from that glycerol and won't need to cannibalize muscle tissue the way it would in somebody who is not fat adapted and keto adapted.
Wow. There's the whole notion of like fat oxidation versus fat loss, I think sometimes comes up in like the fitness community, the sort of evidence-based, using air quotes, fitness community that's very calorie, they tend to be very calorie focused. So what's the distinction between fat oxidation, which is like the burning of fat, and fat loss for people? Is there a difference?
No, I mean you have to oxidize the fat in order to burn it, in order to lose it. We talk a lot about endurance athletics and the idea that the better you are at burning fat, the longer you can go in terms of endurance athletics. And so I was a marathon runner in the 70s, and I was a triathlete in the 80s, did Ironman a couple of times. And the idea there was, as you said, if you only have 2,000 calories worth of glycogen in your muscles, and by the way, that's 1,600 in your muscles and 100 in your liver. So it's even fewer available to the working muscles, because the liver glycogen is pretty much reserved for the brain, or more essential activities than locomotion. So the idea has always been to be as good at burning fat as you possibly could. But the assumption was that it was still going to be about carbohydrate management. So when in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, when I was competing and coaching, those were the years, the decades of carbo loading. So you always went out and carbo loaded. You overloaded on carbs because the recognition was that you're going to burn through them and you're going to need more of them immediately. If you were training, it was carb loading every single day because you're going to go out and run 15 miles today and 20 tomorrow and 10 the next day. And there was never really much attention paid to becoming really, truly fat adapted in keto. In the last decade, a number of athletes have done really well with this ketogenic training and becoming so good at burning fat that they can run literally 6-minute miles, getting 97% of all that caloric requirement from fat and not having to dip into their glycogen stores so much.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is being in keto, is keto like a sort of calorie restriction mimetic? And if so, I guess my question would be like, for an endurance athlete who's chronically in ketosis, wouldn't that be like a stress on the body?
Yeah, it's definitely a stress, and I think you'll find a lot of a stress for an endurance athlete, because an endurance athlete is doing something that is not a particularly smart thing to do for humans, and that is to run at the highest possible output for the longest possible time. Historically, humans are designed to conserve energy and to not want to work that hard and to not want to run that long. If you go back, 10,000 years and you suggest, hey, let's go for a 10-mile run, and your buddy says, well, what are we hunting? And you said, no, we're just going to go out for fun and get a workout.
We look at data now suggesting that 12% of people have good metabolic health. And so to me, I think there's a real public health crisis that's going on. And I don't think that the way to solve that crisis is with like spreadsheets, and macro counting and calorie counting and the like. I think that there's certainly a place for that. I think for people that take their fitness really seriously and are trying to hit goals that are probably so far out of reach for your average person, but that they choose to, maybe go from 14% body fat to 11% body fat, or 10% body. Like for that, you need a certain level of diligence, but that's not really the kind of audience that I'm necessarily trying to reach. I think that those people are very well suited by the content that you guys create, for example, but I've sort of been honed by my experience with my mom. I've been very, very lucky in that I get to go on TV shows like the Dr. Oz show, the Rachel Ray show, where I get to speak to a really large audience. And I go on those shows, which are taped in front of live audiences, and I see the kinds of people sitting in the audiences live at those shows. And they're the sweetest people, but so many of them are struggling with problems related to their weight. So many of them are overweight, many of them are obese. And we know, according to the data, that by the year 2030, it's projected that 1 in 2 people are not just going to be overweight, but obese. So I don't think that calorie counting really plays a role here, or ought to play a role here. I think we need to know more about how foods affect our behavior, with a little bit of knowledge and insight into how food affects our cravings and our satiety checkpoints. I think that really can move the needle in a big way on this crisis.
Well, I think of a different analogy than the one that Sal gave. I think of like all these lost souls that you're talking about, the 88% of the population that are just don't have an idea or a clue, and it's like handing all of them a bunch of TomToms. Or giving them like your Google Maps or whatever.
You dated yourself.
Did I?
TomToms.
It's still around. Garmin's and TomToms are still around. Doug, right? Save me here.
I have no idea.
Honestly, Adam. Fucking Doug.
Navigation devices.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Mountaineers still use them.
No, I might not. Yeah. But to me, that's what it's like, right? So, because it's not that doesn't work, right? If you wanted to lose 30 pounds and you calculate your macros and you track and you weigh all your food, it's a very good approach to get there. Just typing in the address to a location that you need to get and having navigation is going to get there. But the reality of it, you have to learn. At one point you need to learn good practices and behaviors and learn about just the basics and get a good grasp and understanding of how you should be taking care of your body. Otherwise, you're just kind of giving people the answers to the test, and that in itself becoming dependent on that all the time. Very similar to, and I speak to that one because this one is crazy for me. Like I remember when I first realized that. I have lost this sense of direction. As a young kid growing up before the TomTom and the Garmin's came out, I was really good with knowing how to get around. And then I became so dependent on that that I can't even get around my little town without using it all the time. And so I think of that analogy when I think of clients that I would tell, eat this many grams of protein, eat this many grams of carbohydrates, eat this many calories, and hold them accountable to that. It's like, am I really teaching them how to be healthy? And are they really going to do that?
You know what?
Long term.
That brings me to something too, because I've seen you talk about this on social media in Max, and actually get in debates with people. The whole like calorie worshipers, the macro worshipers, well, that's everything. The people in the fitness space that believe that is the most and only important thing. They think that it's just that, and they don't realize that there are other factors that can contribute to poor health, that other factors that don't contain calories. And something that they say a lot is that there are no good or bad foods. Food is food, and if it's if you're eating too many calories, it's bad. If you're not, then it's fine.
Chemicals and molecules.
And I see you saying on your posts, like, no, there are foods that are bad. There are foods that are good. Like, tell me a little bit about that issue.
Well, what is our definition of food? Is it's just something edible, something that we can put into our face holes and digest without killing ourselves. So by that definition, Play-Doh is food, right? Because Play-Doh is basically pure gluten. And you can eat it. Gluten is obviously a protein found in bread.
You can eat paste.
I definitely ate that as a kid.
But
explains a lot.
That statement that there's that food is food, to me that's almost as infuriating as that meme that you always see on fitness accounts on social media that carbs don't make you fat, protein doesn't make you fat doesn't make you fat, eating too many calories makes you fat. I'm like, yeah, that's a mathematical fact, but that doesn't give me the advice. If I'm an overweight person eating ad libitum ultra processed foods day in and day out, that doesn't tell me anything, practical about how to shed the pounds, shed the weight. What am I supposed to do? Open up go into my Google Docs, start a spreadsheet and start counting calories. I think people need to know about how foods affect their behavior. And in a time when 60% of the calories that we consume come from these ultra processed foods, I think it's first of all, it's completely anti-science to say that there's no such thing as a good and bad food. In an ad libitum feeding environment, there are good foods and there are bad foods. And the bad foods are the foods that drive you to overeat. These are the ultra processed foods that by the time you've eaten them to satiety, you've already overconsumed them. Foods like...
Oh, wait, so let's back up. So that's a very powerful statement. So some foods, when you eat them until you feel full, the way that they've been made or engineered, they've actually made you eat more calories than you need because they move that bar of how you feel, that fullness?
Yeah, because they're so they're not satiating and they're highly calorie dense. And so there was this amazing study that was published in 2018. Kevin Hall is the lead researcher. He's a highly regarded obesity researcher. And what they found was that in an ad libitum feeding environment, when you give subjects ultra-processed foods to consume, they end up to the same degree of satiety as they would on a minimally processed food diet. They eat about 500 excess calories per day. And if you stretch that out over the course of a week, that's a pound of weight gain every single week. And then when it was a crossover trial. So when they put those same subjects on a minimally processed food diet, they found that they actually came in at a calorie deficit, naturally. And these were, again, ad libitum, what's so important about that term, what that means, it's a free eating environment. So they're able to eat as much as they want. They're able to eat to satiety, to satisfaction. And so I think that's really important because at the end of the day, you don't want to have to rely on your willpower to reach your ideal body composition or your ideal metabolic health because willpower is a fleeting resource. It's a limited resource. It's a muscle that, for the most part, is fighting a losing battle in the context of the modern food environment.
You also don't want to have to pull out your scale and calculator every single time you're about to eat for the rest of your life, too.
Not only that, but there's a huge margin of error on what we believe to be calories in the calories in, calories out, portion of the equation, right? Nutrition facts labels are not always super accurate. Also, depending on the nature of the food itself, you're absorbing or not absorbing a significant portion of calories. For example, the USDA just published a study where they found that whole nuts, when you eat a handful of whole nuts, you're actually only absorbing about 70 to 80% of those calories, contrary to what was previously thought that you absorbed 100% of those calories. So if you're counting the calories of the nuts that you're eating, for example, that's not an accurate number because whole undigested particles of those nuts flow through you without being actually absorbed. But if you're looking at ultra processed foods, for example, foods made of refined grain flour, or even some of these keto foods, I'm not turning a blind eye to like, these ultra processed keto or paleo approved foods, you're absorbing 100% of the calories in those foods.
Well, not only are you absorbing all of them, but FDA allows them to be manipulated by like 30%. You know that? The labels can be up to 30% wrong. So and of course, if they are marketing themselves as a health food, they're going to lean on that direction, right? So if I'm trying to say I'm low calorie, low carb, low fat, low sugar, whatever, they're going to be pushing the boundaries on the percentage they can get away with. So if the FDA says, okay, you can get away with 30% up or down on these calories, I'm promoting myself as a health food. I'm obviously going to put lower. And so, yeah, not only are you going to eat more, but you're also digesting and also getting in more calories than what it's even telling you.
Yeah. And I understand completely the if it fits your macros fitness movement. Like, for people who are fitness professionals, like you guys, for example, that have really specific body, goals, and you're super diligent about tracking and you enjoy eating pizza or donuts or whatever that happens to be, then of course I understand that you can get that done. Like that's one road up the mountain, right? I just don't see that as being a solution for people at large. And so when I see people with big profiles promoting this idea that all foods are the same, there's no such thing as a good and bad food, fat doesn't make you fat, carbs don't make you fat, it's only calories that we need to be concerned about. To me, that's a public health disservice.
Now, in the context of normal calories, right? So let's say you're eating appropriately. Are there still things that tend to, because you use the term, you said something about people are metabolically, I don't remember what you said 12% of Americans have good metabolic health?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is what's interesting to me. 12% of Americans have good metabolic health. That does not mean that 88% of Americans are overweight or obese, because it's actually a smaller number than that. That means that there's a good chunk of people who are a good body weight but still have poor metabolic health. So they're eating adequate calories, but they're metabolically, they appear to be obese or unhealthy.
Yeah. I'm sure you guys have had clients that were skinny fat, right? The medical term for that is normal weight metabolically obese. So people, I don't know the exact proportion, but there's a significant, small but significant proportion of people who are of normal weight who, when you look under the hood, you see that they have all kinds of, biomarkers suggestive of metabolic problems, whether it's, high fasting insulin, high fasting glucose, chronically elevated insulin, chronically elevated, blood sugar, low HDL, high LDL. Like there's all these things, there's all these like numbers that you can look for that, provide the picture that forms the constellation that a physician would then use to diagnose metabolic syndrome, for example. But that is to say that looking in the mirror is not always the best litmus test for how you're doing internally.
Well, what are the foods that can contribute to that? Because let's say you are eating good calories. What are foods that...
Right. What's the theory is that if you are able to maintain a quote unquote healthy weight, but then you are, metabolically you're hurting, what is probably causing that then?
What's causing the metabolic dysregulation? I mean, it could be any number of things. It could be just, eating all kinds of processed foods that are causing your insulin levels to stay up throughout the the whole period of the day. It could be circadian disruption. It could be overexposure to environmental toxins, which play a role in metabolic health. I mean, there's evidence that exposure to BPA can actually alter insulin responses in the body. BPA, bisphenol A, it's a plasticizing compound that you're exposed to when you heat food in plastic, for example, or when you touch store register receipts. There is evidence that in a dose that is a reasonable dose to expect a human to be exposed to today, that can affect the way the hormone insulin functions in the body. And insulin is it's obviously a fat storage hormone, but it's also important in metabolism and for metabolic health.
Now, how much do like micronutrients play a factor in obesity as well?
I think that micronutrients are super important. When it comes to fat loss, fat gain, I think you're probably better suited looking at the big picture, the bigger picture, macronutrients. Mm-hmm. But minerals like magnesium is super important for metabolic health. I mean, magnesium is a cofactor for hundreds of enzymatic reactions in the body, and some of those are involved in energy production, like ATP production. So I think obviously being nutritionally replete is important as well.
You know what's interesting about what you're saying is that I would imagine that somebody who was of normal body weight but metabolically unhealthy, right? So they have all the markers that you might see in someone who's obese but they're normal weight. That sounds like a very dangerous. It could be a dangerous situation because they might not even be prompted to get checked out. They may think that they're perfectly fine because they look fine, in the mirror, and that could be a problem. What about macronutrients? We'll talk about carbohydrates for a second, but sugars specifically. Do sugars have worse effects on the body generally? Because we hear a lot of debate around that. Like you hear the sugar is bad for you, it's evil, and then we hear the other side that says sugar's fine so long as your calories aren't high. Like, what's the deal with that?
Well, added sugar, for one, is not satiating at all, right? So it provides no satiety benefit, and yet it's empty calories. And as I mentioned, we now live in a world where so many of us are struggling with our ever-expanding waistlines. And also, to Justin's point, 90% of us are deficient in at least one essential nutrient. So to me, in an environment where we're overfed and undernourished, like being an apologist for added sugar, to me, is, again, another public health disservice, which I see all the time in the fitness space. Is a little bit of added sugar bad if you're working out all the time and you're super active, you're getting your 10,000 steps a day or whatever the recommendation is? No, I don't think that it's that huge of a deal. But if you have, glucose homeostasis problems, if you have glucose tolerance issues, then added sugar and really starchy, high carbohydrate foods, I think, can be very problematic because your blood sugar then will become elevated higher and stay elevated longer than it will for somebody who has normal glucose regulation.
What are some of the best satiety producing macronutrients or foods? Like what have you seen in terms of things that people can eat that'll help them naturally want to eat less?
I mean, I think, like, preaching to the choir a little bit, but protein is, by and large, I think it's the most important macronutrient to be aware of. To know what a powerful tool protein is for satiating your hunger. It's so important. It's the most satiating macronutrient. When you undereat protein, you're going to eat more carbs and fat. And, when you, both in the short term and the long term, protein is the most satiating. So when when I have like a hunger pang, I reach for high protein foods. And I also know that it's a lot more difficult for me to pump the brakes when I'm snacking on foods that are low in protein and high in carbs and fat. So these are, typical junk foods, right? Like, chips, paleo puffs, Doritos, whatever you want to call them. Like, low protein foods tend to be junk foods. Junk foods tend to be low protein foods. And I think that there's a reason why they are so hyper palatable, why they're so addictive, and why ultimately they underlie the obesity epidemic. I think so I think reaching for protein, that's major. And then also there are non-dietary things as well that I think we need to be talking about, in the same breath, like sleep. The fact that so many of us are underslept these days. When you're underslept, you tend to crave more junk food the next day.
What's the reason behind that? Is that because it produces more of the feel-good chemicals because you feel crappy from not getting good sleep? So you eat the hyperpalatable stuff to get your serotonin levels. What are the theories behind that?
Well, I think there's an endocrine component to it. So, when you're underslept, just on one night of poor sleep, you're basically pre-diabetic the next day. So it affects how the hormone insulin
really
functions. I think it also affects leptin and ghrelin, and there's a lot of these hormones are influenced by circadian rhythms. And when you are underslept, sleep is the master hormonal regulator. And so aside from that, I think there's a neurobiological component as well. So when you undersleep, there's less activity in the front part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is sort of the home of decision-making and executive function. And so when you are underslept, you basically have a brain that's operating more primally, and it wants things that are going to comfort it, that are more essential to survival. So essentially sugar, and hyperpalatable foods, fatty foods, as well. Emotional regulation becomes a lot more difficult when you're underslept, and that sense of willpower. Like, I think there was an experience that I had very early on. It doesn't really have anything to do with food, but I went through a breakup, and I had this subjective experience where I learned that on days that I was underslept, it was a lot more difficult for me to deal with the the emotions that I was feeling.
Yeah,
you know,
true.
when I was going through that breakup. And so I think the same thing happens with food. It's just like when we're underslept, you know, our hormones are all dysregulated, and our brain just doesn't, it's not like working in our, you know, that subconscious hunger just isn't working in our favor. It's working against
Well,
us.
you're not, now you're moving in the direction that I like to talk. Right now we've been talking a lot about, you know, calories and macros and micronutrients, but really to me the stuff that really made the difference with clients was teaching them the behaviors. And that's the stuff that I feel like the fitness space, the bodybuilders,
devoid of it.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. It's like, okay, we can weigh and measure your food all day long, but one of the things I remember seeing happen when I was competing was I was blown away. I remember telling these guys when I got into it, we were all hanging out together, and I was in the middle of competing in men's physique, and I remember coming back and telling them, I said, dude, I have seen more eating disorders in this competitive bodybuilding world than I had previously seen in, you know, almost 2 decades of training average clients. And that blew my mind, because we look at their bodies, right? We look at them and they look amazing. They're on covers of magazines. Everyone's following them, taking their advice. But the reality is it's the relationship. It promotes this binge and restrict behavior. And forget the science of the calories and the measuring and the weighing and the macro, micro. It's like when you tell somebody and you have them restrict like that, and they are calculating their weighing and they're staying so dialed in, you create this behavior of I can't have this. I can't have this. This is bad. This is what. And then you finally break, which everybody eventually does. And a lot of times, and when you see it in the competitive world, when they break, it's after they did their show. They've disciplined themselves for 2 months, 3 months, maybe even 6 months long to get to that goal. And then they just cut loose. And I'd see guys and girls put 20, 30 pounds on in like 4 days. I mean, that's just insane to me. And that's obviously an example of like an exaggerated version of what most people will go through. But I think they go through a similar thing of going through this, okay, I'm on a diet now. It's New Year's resolution. Let me start weighing my food. I'm going to have these salads. I'm going to exercise every single day. And all it does is it promotes this binge restrict behavior. And I think that is the more important conversation than even getting down to this calorie and macro talk.
Oh, totally. You talked about protein, Max. I'll give you an example of what Adam's talking about. So I figured this out later on as a trainer, but I would tell clients, because protein's very satiating, right? I would tell clients, hit your protein goals, don't worry about anything else. And naturally, they would eat less. Naturally, just because I know it was so satiety producing. So I'd say whenever you have your meal, eat your protein first in your meal. So if your goal is 25 grams of protein per meal or whatever, eat that first, then eat the rest. And
Super smart.
And they would just naturally lose weight, and they thought, oh, the protein's making me lose weight. No, it's because of it produces more satiety. Now that advice, because you are in the wellness space, sometimes that does put you at odds with the vegan and vegetarians, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I like people from all these different factions like to come out and attack me.
Yeah, what's the deal with that?
But I don't care. I'm just trying, like bring it on. I'm just
because you're handsome, bro.
I mean,
I'm saying that's working against you.
Trying to keep up with the looks of you guys. No, I mean, yeah, protein I think is incredibly important, and I appreciate it and I value it. And I think that, this whole low protein diet cult to me is something that I think is another thing that's harming people. First of all, we don't know like the results of taking somebody who lives in a first world country, who's exposed to the standard American diet, and then is told to eat a low protein diet, and then eats a low protein version of the standard American diet. I mean, to me, that just sounds like a recipe for disaster. And there's really no good evidence that low protein diets promote longevity or health. In fact, people over 65 who eat higher protein have greater longevity and reduced risk for cancer. So I think that's just not smart. Also, there's this concept of anabolic resistance, which I'm sure that you guys can speak to, but as we get older, we probably need to consume more protein to maintain our muscle mass. So I think these are non-trivial points.
Not to mention, when we look back at our clients, it was the number one macronutrient that I had to address with all clients, normal people. The only people I ever had to say eat less protein to were some bodybuilding fanatics that I adopted. Like if I got you and you had been bodybuilding for 3 years and for some reason eating 3 grams of protein for every pound of body weight, I would end up telling you to scale back because that's why you're having a hard time shitting and you had all those issues with your digestion because of how much you're eating. Everybody else, every other male and female that just came in for overall health or losing weight or wanting to put a little bit of muscle on or work on their mobility, every one of their diets that I assessed all under consumed protein. It's for sure one of the most neglected.
It's hard to do. There's this researcher, Bill Campbell, who I follow on social media. He's like pretty well known in the bodybuilding fitness space. He's like a body composition scientist, and he posted this. He did this like little study with his students where he asked them all to try to consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and he said that only about half of them could adhere to it because it's just so damn hard to do. It's so hard to do because it's so satiating.
Yeah, it is. And along those lines with protein, let's say I have 2 pieces of meat, equal calories, equal grams of proteins, macros, all that stuff. One is, what people might say in your space, especially high quality, grass-fed, the animal was in good conditions. The other one, factory-produced, grain-fed. What are the differences? They got the same calories, same protein, same fats. Are there any differences?
With a grass-fed with a more proper, I mean, I think obviously in an ideal world we're all consuming 100% grass-fed beef, pasture-raised eggs, and free-range chicken, or things like that. But I also, and this is where like the paleo people will come at me, I also feel, and I've become a lot more moderate in my stance over time because I truly believe that like if you live in a part of the country, like a food desert where you don't have access to 100% grass-fed beef, for example, is eating grain-fed beef bad for you? And my answer to that is no. I think that it's a much better option even than, boxed mac and cheese, which is, I think, the kind of food that it basically typifies ultra-processed foods, which many people are eating, for all meals of the day. And so, regular, as much as I would never get behind and endorse factory farmed meat, I just can't do that from an ethical standpoint because, it's so cruel to the animals. Like it's still one of the most nutrient dense foods available to most people. And we love to talk about the harms of modern food production and the modern food environment, right? But like the food system is pretty great in that anybody anywhere can access beef. And chicken and things like that, or eggs, conventional eggs. Like I don't buy conventional eggs because I just know that, they just how they're produced, like the chicken has been reduced to this egg laying machine and they're kept in these awful crates and whatever. But that being said, like even a conventional egg is still an amazingly nutrient dense food.
Now, but there are some small differences though, right? Like if I had a pasture, raised egg versus a conventional egg, what would I see nutrient-wise difference?
Well, you can always tell the how healthy the chicken was by the robustness of the shell of the egg. So if you take a conventional egg, you'll notice that the shells are very, very thin and brittle.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, whereas a pasture-raised egg, the shells are really hard to crack. And this is like no joke. They have higher mineral density, like in the eggshells. You can also tell from the color of the yolk. A pastured egg is going to have like a much darker, almost orangish hue to the yolk, and that's due to the higher presence of carotenoids. Carotenoids are plant pigments, which basically accumulate in the yolk, and they protect neural tissue. So it's actually interesting if you consider the fact that in an embryo, the nervous system is the first system to assemble, and the brain is obviously it's a major component of the central nervous system, that an egg yolk literally contains everything that nature has deemed important to grow a healthy brain. And so it's no wonder then that egg yolks are full of cholesterol. We know that the brain is full of cholesterol. Choline, omega-3 fatty acids like DHA, but then also carotenoids. Carotenoids, which are found in plants. This is another reason why I don't think I could ever fully get behind the carnivore diet, because carotenoids are plant pigments. And we know that they protect neural tissue. And they were first identified because we can see them in the eye. They protect the eyes. The eyes are basically just an extension of your brain, and contain neural tissue. But we now know that these same compounds accumulate in the brain, where they protect brain cells from oxidative stress. They help maintain cognitive function as we age, and they can actually even boost your cognitive function when you're young and healthy. So that's why I think looking at egg yolks and making sure that they're really dark and and deeply orange, in hue is a sign of a healthy
I
yolk.
can't eat conventional eggs anymore. Like if I crack a conventional egg with next to a pasture, it just looks pale and
Pale, anemic.
anemic. It
Yeah.
does. Now the differences in these nutrients on egg versus egg, are they big or are they small?
They're normally smaller.
Yeah, I would say that they're significant. You get, I believe it's something like 11 times the amount of DHA in a pastured egg compared to, in absolute terms, is the amount of DHA in an egg going to be comparable to what you get in just one piece of wild salmon? Probably pretty small in comparison. But yeah, I think that there are big nutritional differences. Same with, grass-fed beef versus grain-fed beef. But we can't let what's the term? You can't let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Okay.
Yeah. You can't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? So like even a conventional egg is, I think, a great nutritional resource for people, right?
Now, me personally, I've had a lot of clients that are just like fixated on novelty. And that's something that I've had to help kind of coach them through in terms of like trying to get satiated. So novelty is one of those things. They're always trying to seek, what tastes the best. And that's like the entire focus of like when they're eating. So how do you address that?
We're so spoiled humans. Like we always want like newer flavor. There's that famous Jerry Seinfeld quote, right? Like about men when they're watching TV. Like men don't care what's on TV. They only want to know what else is on.
Right.
It's the same thing it's the same way that we approach our diets. But then you look at like an animal like a cat or whatever, they're content to eat the same thing day in and day out. But no, I think novelty is important, switch things up, keep things interesting. That's where I think, learning how to cook is really valuable, and learning how to take like simple ingredients and turn them into something transcendent. I really value like the way Mediterranean style cooking kind of takes that approach. Same with Japanese cooking. Like there's endless novelty in Mediterranean and Japanese cuisine, but they use basically just a handful of simple ingredients.
I just read an article that said that the Mediterranean, like when you're comparing like quote unquote diets, that the Mediterranean diet across the board seems to rank consistently the highest or among the best in terms of health. Are you familiar with that article?
Yeah, the Mediterranean diet. Yeah. I mean, it's always cited as being one of the most protective and most longevity promoting diets out there. So, but there are other dietary patterns that are equally healthy, like the Japanese dietary pattern. We just haven't studied it as much.
What are the characteristics of the Mediterranean diet? Like what's in there that you think is promoting some of these health benefits?
I think the preponderance of minimally processed food. No unhealthy cooking oils. Like if you go to a true Mediterranean kitchen, you won't find any canola oil. You won't find any corn oil, soybean oil, none of that garbage. They're cooking primarily with extra virgin olive oil, and they also use extra virgin olive oil as a sauce. I'm a huge extra virgin olive oil fan. And sometimes you get from the vegan community that all oil is bad, including olive oil, which is a complete... Like,
I never heard this. Vegans are saying that?
Yeah, they have anti-oil. There's like this sect. It's like a sect of veganism. of the
real
plant.
hardcore.
They're like, I like being vegan. It's not extreme enough.
Yeah.
I need to get more extreme.
Yes, exactly. They're anti-oil. And so they've banished all kinds of like liquid oils, including extra virgin olive oil, which to me makes no sense. It's also not a science-based, like that right there is a very blatant divergence from the science to say that extra virgin olive oil is not good for you.
What's the reasoning behind this?
Behind the no oil?
Yeah.
I think their claim is that it damages the endothelium or endothelial function, which is how basically your arteries respond to environmental pressures and are able to expand and contract. Whenever you eat fat, it's going to fill your blood with triglycerides. You're going to see, you would be able to see that on a blood draw. I think most recently that was illustrated in the, documentary, and I'm using air quotes, Game Changers. But
propaganda.
Yeah. But that's totally normal. It's the same thing like when you eat something we know that chronically elevated blood sugar is not good for you. Does that mean that the occasional blood sugar spike is also not good for you? No, not necessarily, because in a normal metabolically healthy body, your body brings the blood sugar right back down, right? Same thing with postprandial elevation in triglycerides. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I think that sect has sort of, it's been a bit of a a permutation from, or like, it's sort of been this like extrapolation from, the fact that, well, meat is high in fat, so we have to be against high fat diets. And if we're going to be against high fat diets, then we have to be against pure oil. And so, but to me, none of it makes any sense.
How
I think part of the reason why people do tend to beat themselves up if they can't adhere to diet XYZ is that the purveyors of those diets tend to promote very black or white thinking about those diets. Like,
Yes.
you can only lose weight if you follow a strict ketogenic diet, which we know is not true. You don't have to do a ketogenic diet to lose fat. You don't have to do a low carb diet. People lose lots of weight on low fat diets.
Yeah.
So it's really about finding, I think, what works for you. And I like the 100 gram of carb heuristic because it's very moderate. It's very moderate, but it also skims off the top, I think, a large portion of what are typically empty calories in the context of the standard American diet. Your average American today eats what, like 300 grams of carbohydrates a day?
300 is very average right now. Yeah. And recommended 25 grams of sugar a day. Most people are eating hundreds, 200, like it's just unbelievable. So just even taking an eye, and that's why, Target 100 is all about this holistic vision of like, yeah, we can talk about the food pillar all day, and food is critical. So, we started and I said, like, food, it's not about food. It is about behavior, but food is very critical. And I think it is the place for people to start, because what we know about weight loss is if you can start there to examine that, it's where, it's where you're most comfortable. And then I kind of work you in these other pillars of hydration and movement, exercise, stress, and sleep. Because if you don't address those 6 things, it's not just about a food plan. You're not going to be successful if it's ruling your life. I mean, you gave a great example. We put food in on stress. If we don't learn to manage our stress without using food, we're going to eventually fall off of that food plan and go back to using food as our stress reliever, because it is the go-to habit and behavior that is running our lives. So I think it's really important to think about food, but also expand it out into this place of a more holistic view, so that when that food plan fails, that's why these 6 pillars, often people say to me, they're like, I really enjoy this plan because I have 6 opportunities for success. My food wasn't great today, but I took that 10,000 step walk in the afternoon and I win. And I went to bed on time and I drank my water. And sometimes those 3 pillars can give you as much weight loss as food. I start you with food because that's where you think you need to start. And because food can give you success off the bat, right? By changing a few things. What we know about weight loss is for you to see weight loss in the earliest stages of a weight loss program is where you begin to get real hooked on it, because you're like, oh, okay, I can do this. And it wasn't that bad. So that's why I often tell people focus on your food, because that's where you're comfortable and it'll give you some success. Then move on into these other pillars. And when I tell you, I have a worksheet that I'm sort of famous for called the wheel, and all 6 of them are laid out in a wheel in perfect symmetry. Because in my mind, not a single one of them is less important. So it's not like food takes up 3/4 of the wheel and the others are squished into 1/4. If you aren't getting to bed on time, if you're not getting your recommended, you have a huge gap in your ghrelin and your leptin hormone that you're going to be starving all day. Your body and your brain, basically, they look at your brain and they're not sure if you actually smoked pot or if you just didn't get sleep, and you will have the munchies. So sleep is like so underrated in weight loss. So, I just want to open people's minds that, get out of that diet hole of it being about a food plan and you not having any control over this, and that it can be as simple as like getting in bed and going to sleep, which is like the greatest thing in the world for me, so.
What would you say is one of the most important things, or the most important thing that people can do to optimize their sleep?
I really think it's about, can I say a couple of them?
Yeah, please. The more the merrier.
Yeah, I think people overconsume caffeine. At this point, it's become very, acceptable to drink a lot of caffeine. I think people don't realize how that's disrupting them. I think thinking through that, I think, being hydrated is an excellent way to have your systems running and be more, aware. I think your sleep environment is critical. Having it be dark enough, be pleasant, removing screens from your sleep environment, but also just triggering, right? Triggering the routine and creating a routine around bedtime. I hear a lot of people, social media is making people suffer right now because they just get into this habit loop of getting on there, and then they go, or they get on Netflix or whatever it is. I think it's about really having those triggers that say, this is when I turn these things off, and I move into a mode where I am going to let my body understand that we're moving into another phase of our day. Right now, it's just all sort of mushing together for people. So delineating this restful portion, I think, is really critical.
What do you say to somebody who's listening who just can't believe that it's the way that they sleep or the time that they get to bed has any bearing on their weight loss journey?
I'd say look at the science. What we know, as I say, so we will look at somebody's hormone levels when they sleep less than around 7 hours a night, right? So I'm going to always go back to the ish, is that, some people are fine with 6.5, some people need 8, some people need 9. You got to do the work and figure out what your formula is for sleep. And then you got to, I protect mine with my life, because what we know from looking at your hormone levels of someone who's sleeping less than those 7 hours, your ghrelin hormone is actually elevated by 15%, and your leptin. So ghrelin makes you hungry. It makes you, we call it the go eat hormone. It makes you think that it's time to eat. Your leptin is like the thermostat that says, oh, okay, we've had enough. Let's turn the machine off. So leptin decreases by 15%, ghrelin increases by 15. You've got a 30% hormone gap here of your go eat hormone, when really pushing you all day. People think also when they're tired, sort of like we mistake hunger for, thirst for hunger. It's the same thing with sleep. We mistake food with giving us energy because we're tired. So I'm just going to eat something that'll give me energy. That's an energy source. And yeah, you're right. But it's not when you're chasing the ghrelin, which has made you hungrier by 15% all day.
That's insane. Yeah. And the magnitude, according to the latest research I've seen, is that it can actually make you consume about 400 calories more per day, which if you're underslept every day of the week, that's almost a pound of fat gain by the end of the week. And then you stack that week after week after week. That's a spare tire.
There it is. Well, and also you can't sleep and eat. I'm all about that, right? I can't really sleep and eat. So if I just go to bed, I'm cutting out an hour of eating time, So it's that kind of thought process around I can't exercise and eat really either. Right. So those are a couple of really good barriers to taking in fewer calories. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Do you have any feelings on intermittent fasting as a way of sort of, extending out those borders and sort of widening out that fasting window?
Yeah, I see it really, really working well for people, especially now in this new Zoom kind of new pandemic-ish, post-ish, that because we're so sedentary, I think it helps people. I think we need to, every one of us, including myself, who I've been maintaining very easily for a long time, struggled for many months during the pandemic because this sitting all day I had to kind of go back to the drawing board. So what I think it is helpful for people to close that window and just give themselves a little bit of a parameter, if you will, for what I see of okay, no, I'm not eating after this, and I don't eat before this. Where I think people make a mistake is, again, in this diet culture and them learning just the very, very top edges of a diet and just hearing about it from Shape Magazine or something like that, is that they think, oh, well, if I'm gonna eat between 12 and 8, I can eat whatever I want. And that's this huge misconception around intermittent fasting from the diet people that I work with, which are kind of like everyday folks who are only hearing this piece of information and then thinking, well, if I do this, and then they don't lose any weight because they're taking in, 3,000 calories in that eating window of whatever they wanted. It's very important to be feeding yourself well in that window as well. But I love for people to use it to get in touch with their hunger signals as well. I find a lot of people don't know at all at this point what it actually feels like to be hungry or what it feels like to be thirsty. So I think like pushing that back and saying, I'm not even hungry. Why am I eating? I'm eating because someone said I should eat breakfast and because it's 8. And kind of questioning and learning to navigate your body. I think intermittent fasting is really good for that. Finding out where and what your level of best energy is. Like for me personally, I don't eat before about 1:00 every day. And I find I have such great energy. And I had to learn that by trial and error because I was coming from a culture that said breakfast is the most important meal of the day. But through trial and error, I was like, wow, I feel great. And then by about 1, if I don't start eating something, it gets diminishing results and I get a little anxiety. I start to feel a little off. I'm not as focused. But I learned if I eat too much food, right? So that's another mistake. They don't eat, they get overly hungry, and then they open that window and eat this giant meal. So it's all about kind of figuring out what works for your body through trial and error. And I like that. I like being able to say, get people to get in touch with what's going to really work. Are you eating when you're not hungry? You don't even know because you don't know what hunger feels like at this point.
Yeah, I love that. I love the term that you use, parameter. It is, like many, like many strategies that are out there, it's essentially a tool. And I think one of the other potential downsides, and I'm generally a fan of intermittent fasting, but I think one of the other downsides is that people that that intend on creating this fasting or this feeding window for themselves, and then don't find it to be sustainable. They blow it. They eat breakfast when they didn't intend to. Then they have this moral failure, this sense of moral failure.
Yes.
Which at the end of the day, it was just a tool to begin with. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. It's fine. You don't need intermittent fasting to lose weight. Just the same way that you don't need to be on a ketogenic diet to lose weight.
Yeah. Oh, and that's it is, I counsel everyone who does it. Is there are days I wake up and I'm hungry at 9 a.m. and I eat at 9 a.m. because I know I'm hungry. Like I know it's true hunger. I know my body. I know what I need. So not every day looks the same. It's not this perfect, like outline and you have to follow it and be perfect all the time. And if you didn't, right, like you're saying, that's what I really learned as we looked at that brain science was that that reward center, once you feel guilt and shame that you ate outside of the window, now you're a bad person. I'm always like, you didn't kill anybody. You ate breakfast, so really moving away from that diet culture and diet mentality of perfectionism and needing to do it right all the time.
So true. I mean, I generally won't eat until about noon, but if a family member texts me and it's 10 a.m. and they want to get breakfast, I'm not going to say no because I'm so rigidly trying to adhere to my intermittent fasting window. Or when I'm traveling, sometimes not over the past 2 years, obviously, unfortunately, but I love traveling to Europe. And whenever you're in a European hotel, the breakfasts are amazing. And of course, breakfast stops being served at around 10 a.m.
Yeah.
I always make use of like a good hotel breakfast.
I miss those.
Me too. So we don't have that much time left, but I want to talk about just one more pillar. I know you said you have 6, right, that you talk about in your book. Yes. Wow, incredible. But movement. Let's talk a little bit about movement. You mentioned walking. Walking is such a great place to start, I guess. But what are your thoughts on movement and finding the discipline to move more? What are some simple behavior changes that people can make to integrate more movement into their routines?
Yeah, I mean, and we are it's breaking my heart. Like sitting is there, there's this saying, sitting is the new smoking. If you sit for more than 8 hours a day, you have a 90% increased risk of diabetes.
Wow.
That's insane, right? So for all of this that has happened for us, people are sitting more and those diabetes rates are going through the roof. So you really want to start thinking about kind of what I was teaching you, which is you're not going, and what you said, a body in motion stays in motion. Understanding that you're going to have to actually trigger and plan and habituate movement into your day. So, it's a, hey, okay, I drink my coffee, I put my shoes on and I walk out the door, or I, get up and I, meet a friend, or I walk my kids to school, whatever it is, and finding those ways and times to trigger that movement throughout the day. There's also that very important, just exercising for an hour and then sitting all day, it's as dangerous as not doing it at all almost. So it's really about standing up. So when you think about our bodies in this position that I'm in right now, right? I'm bent in half. I'm at this angle where blood flow is constricted to my legs. And we see that our heart rates drop and our metabolic rate drops. So, we have this huge metabolic drop while we're sitting. So just standing up and getting blood flowing in these, even 10, 15, 20-minute bursts throughout the day is truly life-changing. It fires up your metabolism. It changes your mood, so many things around it. And, I always say to people, like, if I can never get you to the exercise pillar, it is by far the hardest pillar because it's so complex and difficult and it's even painful. I'll take, walking, I will get you 100-pound weight loss with just walking. That's how powerful that pillar is. So I just want people to take that away of like, again, it's not going to be, it sounds so easy. Oh yeah, that's right. I was just going to get these 20-minute walk breaks. I, to this day, with my planned walks, still fight myself on it a lot of the time of like, I don't have time. Oh, I should make that phone call. I'll just send that email. It's okay. And I'm like, no, you won't. And I've gotten very good at shutting that brain down, which is telling me not to do something and stay seated and say the email will still be there. Get up and go. I do love wearable technology as well, because it serves as, right, just like my water bottle serves as a trigger, having that thing on your wrist serves as a trigger and a motivator. You can set it to buzz, you can set walking challenges so that you're in competition with people, so that you have more excitement around getting to that, that number. So I think using technology to trigger your behavior and motivate you can be very helpful. There's things like Step Bet, right? There's an app where you can you make a bet and win money, be in a step bet and get, I have lots of folks who love that because it just is like, oh, it's a small amount of money. They make like $8, but they get so stuck on I gotta get to the step bet.
Yeah, I love that. And it also doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. I don't know if most people know this, but your iPhone naturally tracks your steps.
Yep.
I don't know if people can see this. I'm going to hold it
Yeah.
up. My steps are miserably low for the past few days. So I'm not don't, do as I say, not as I do kind of thing.
It looks like you're standing though, at least.
Right now I'm standing. Yeah.
That's
I'm pretty
good,
active.
right?
I am standing. Yeah.
I liken the sitting, the image I use is like a bent garden hose, right? If anyone's ever been out gardening and you get a kink in the garden hose and the water just kind of flows really slowly, that's what's happening when you're seated. So even you just being standing right now, your blood is forced to pump it all the way to your top and all the way through down to your toes. And that creates a much better flow and much better metabolic rate.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. But yeah, it's the health app in in your iPhone.
It's like a little red heart. It's in a white square, a little red heart. You tap that. They've been tracking your steps, guys. It's got your phone. It's creepy, but it's true. So you can look back at your history, the only thing I always say is if you're going to do it on that, make sure that you put your phone in your pocket all the time. Cause if you sit it on your desk and it's not capturing,
it's not tracking.
steps. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you a big personally like gym junkie? Like, are you going to the gym,
I
having
am.
crazy
I'm
intense workouts, or what?
Yeah, I'm certified as a personal trainer. I've
Oh wow,
gotten
love that.
yeah, no, I really believe in knowing everything about my 6 pillars and experiencing that from a true research and science and data perspective, and not just coming at you with like how I feel. I personally, I'm addicted to exercise. It's totally changed my life. It makes a huge difference in my mood, in my confidence, in my just the way that I perform in a day. So I am a avid kickboxer. I love F45. I weight train. I run about 6 miles 2, 3 times a week. I just love it, and I could not. I don't think I feel like it's such a superpower to create that habit and find how different you feel from implementing that in a day versus a day when you don't. And I think that becomes very clear when it becomes habitual.
Yeah, you're super fit. 6 miles 3 times a week to me sounds like a nightmare. People listening to that are going to be like, okay, I'm out. I
Yeah,
cannot
no, and it's not what you
possibly
have to
replicate
do.
what this
Yeah.
superwoman does.
No, and you don't have to do that, right? Like that's I go back to my like you can walk and lose weight, and you can walk and have that mood elevation. I somehow, down the years of doing this and loving it and being a part of it, developed just a real almost like a need for it for mental health too.
Mm.
I think it saved me during this pandemic. It just kept me very even and focused and optimistic. So yeah, no, you do not have to replicate my levels by any means, but I would encourage people to really investigate, their changes in their mood and their energy levels more than anything else. Don't use it as a weight loss tool. In fact, it can actually sometimes really confuse uh, what looks like weight loss, because as you're gaining lean muscle, it can look like you're not losing weight on the scale, and that can frustrate people. So I think like really understanding that exercise should not be about erasing food choices. It's not a giant eraser for you to go eat what you want and then go exercise it off. It's not going to work. But more around your mood, your energy, your sleep. That's another great one, right? When you think of that connection between better sleep and exercise. So that's where I became sort of addicted, if you will, to it, and it just feels good.
I don't sleep as well on days that I haven't exercised. Exercise builds
Same.
sleep pressure.
Yeah.
So that by the time by the time your head hits the pillow, your body yearns for the opportunity to rejuvenate itself and repair, and
It
to
does.
rebuild. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this. Well, so much great information that you've dropped. Yeah, I love the putting the focus on simple things that you can do, simple behavioral changes that are gonna take the motivation factor out of it, that are going to take the psychology out of it. You know, you can, I forget the quote, but it's like you're essentially acting your way into a new way of being.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I have another thing that I say all the time. I have this like equation, right? And if you saw it on a chalkboard, right, it would be a big B over T equals R. Behavior over time equals results. So if you behave differently, right, if you eat a good breakfast, over time, you will lose weight. If you take a 20-minute walk in the morning and then a 20-minute walk in the evening, and you do that over time, the new behavior over time equals results. So it's not find a magic food plan, stick to it, hate your life. No, really examine the behaviors that over time, going to bed on time, and you don't have to be perfect. Consistency beats perfection every time in weight loss. So really thinking about what behaviors would I like to pick up and habituate that over time, right? If I stop eating after dinner, and over time, that's going to lead to weight loss, because that's 300, 500, 700 calories that we're taking in. Over time, that leads to weight loss.
I love that. Stop eating after dinner. Eat if you're hungry when you wake up, but check in with yourself first to, and question whether or not you really truly are hungry, or if you're just eating breakfast because somebody told you that you have to eat breakfast, that it's the most important meal of the day. Drink more water, walk more, get to bed on time, create a consistent sleep schedule for yourself. I mean, you almost make it sound easy.
Yeah, that's what I believe, is that it is simpler than it's been made out for you to believe, and that it can be simple. It's the title of my book, is The World's Simplest Weight Loss Program in 6 Easy Steps. It's simple, but it's not easy.
I love that.
It's a brain game, guys. It's get in there, know there's going to be negative self-talk and disbelief and limiting beliefs and triggers and routines and habits and things that are, it's simple, but not easy. So I'm not minimizing that this is a really difficult thing to do. I do it. I've been doing it personally for a lot of years. So I understand the struggle. But I always say you're so worth it. You're so worth it. You do it for somebody else.
And what does success look like? I mean, we know that it's seldom linear, but
absolutely.
But what is that? I mean, what does success look like to you?
I think it's really interesting. Success, what I see for people is it's certainly not linear. What I often see in weight loss is that people get excited and they get into the program and they have success. And then there's usually a little bit of a plateau. And that's usually where people get kind of into this space where they're like, well, maybe it isn't working. And maybe I've come to the end of the rainbow here and I can't go any further. And what people don't understand is that, like, weight loss is a Rubik's Cube. It changes with every season. It changes when you go back to work. It changes when the kids go back to school. It changes when you change a job. It's constantly changing. And so for you, when you see a little stall or when you see a small regain of weight, that's what real weight loss looks like, because we have real lives with real things going on. And we have to then say, oh, you know what? Okay. I had to readjust all 6 of my pillars in the pandemic. I had to go back in and rewrite my entire journey. I had to figure out how to do this all over again. I didn't have a gym. I've got 2 kids home. I had to school them. I had to do my job. I had to figure out technology. I have a husband who's a Broadway actor who's now 100% out of work, right? Like, this was devastating. And I just go in, and it's like a Rubik's Cube. One by one, I said, well, how am I going to do exercise? How am I going to, trigger my hydration? Because I used to carry a water bottle in my bag and it was all habitual. Now it was gone. The habits are gone. So being very aware that this is I call it like a board game. And sometimes life's going to come in and take all the pieces and throw them back on the floor. And you're going to think, oh my gosh, I can't do this. And I say, pick one up at a time and put it back on the board. Let's think hydration this week. Let's think food next week. Let's think movement the week after that. But don't try to do everything at once. That's a big piece. So I think success comes in, for me, when I see someone understanding that this isn't linear, that this is going to go, it's going to take time, and that it's all about your behaviors and the environment and the inputs, and you noticing them, right? Like me noticing, I'm starting to have more cocktails than is really going to be sustainable for a healthy life or a healthy weight. And just being very real with myself. I'm not a bad person. I'm just creating a loop that feels good in the moment, but can I systematically unravel that? Can I start to make a kombucha cocktail? Can I start to go on a walk with my husband? Can I start to disrupt the loop that isn't giving me what I want ultimately? I think that's when I see real success happen. And it's not sexy, guys. Real weight loss like this that I'm talking about, it is not 10 pounds in 5 days. It is much more moderate and much more sustainable. You can have an ice cream cone with your family and you can live it, like that's what I call success, is when people realize you don't have to give everything up, but you have to make choices just like you do everywhere else in your life. I'm like, I don't understand why this spot became like this magical unicorn where, all of a sudden all the rules don't apply. You don't use your work smarts. You don't use like all the things that you use everywhere in life. It all of a sudden goes out the window in this particular space. Use the skills that you have If you're organized, if you're, very highly motivated, like use what you've got, and understand that the topography of it is going to change over and over, and you're going to have to go back to the drawing board here and there to figure out, okay, I used to take sometimes 20,000 steps a day in New York City, and now I was under 3,000 a day in the pandemic. So I had to figure something out. It's going to happen. It's just going to keep happening. Winter comes and all of a sudden I can't run outside. What am I going to do? Right. So you've got to be aware that this is not a static process at all. Like once you figure it out, you're okay. And that's the game and you're done. It's constant and it evolves. I'm 50. It's not the same as when I was 30. That's a, change of life, of where you are, where you live, what season it is. Just keep your eyes open as to what behaviors you need to work on now.
I mean, I think, spreading the message that there are simple things that people can do every day that don't cost a lot of money, that are not this super, like there's so many purists, I feel like, in our world, where if you're not eating like perfectly in accordance with like what I think our paleo ancestors ate, like there's just so many, there's this like this air of like perfection, we so often let perfect be the enemy of the good. But I don't know. I mean, are there simple, cheap, or completely free things that people can do, regardless of their financial situation, that'll have a measured impact on their health and fitness levels?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, like, what are the, what's like the 80%? What's like the 20% that's going to make 80% of the progress for these people?
I think we have to take the. Are you talking about for people in general?
Well, people that are listening that might, have either be part of these underserved communities that we're talking about, or have access to them.
Yeah, that's real. I mean, I think it first starts with you. So it's a thought process of, if we want to make it super easy, I think it's stop thinking that everything comes down to individual action, right? Like I think individual action creates structural change. But people, I mean, to an extent, they have to find the value in it for themselves, regardless of how much we talk about how great it is. I think when you help people discover that action for themselves and make it as easy as possible to show up, that changes everything. So it's, there are community centers in your local spot, like, doing something once a month, teaming up with these structures that already exist. And half the time, I remember in college, I did something called I think it was the Agatston Urban Nutrition Initiative. And I used to just, after my classes, I would go to a local high school or middle school and just talk to these kids or like help them cook or do basic things. And I think with that, it's just that first, just show up at your community and give people the immediate actionable steps that matter. Because we're so caught up in work, to be honest, that we end up thinking that's the most important thing. Or, when things become so vivid online, then we immediately want to help. But there's situations, again, in our own backyard that I think we could change. But with us individually, with our health habits, to be honest, I think people focus on exercise too much. I think exercise is like the connective tissue and it's the catalyst, but it's really everything else that makes exercise worthwhile. Like, how are you eating? How are you sleeping? What's up with your mental states? Those things. But I think the industrial complex has pushed the physical activity so harsh that it turns everybody else off.
Is that because they push exercise as being an antidote to the junk food that they sell? They're like, look, buy our, packaged processed, ultra processed crap. The reason why you're obese is not because of these foods, it's because you're just not moving enough.
Yeah, you nailed it on the head. I mean, in Brooklyn, I've noticed this. I was walking around, and at the subway stops, sponsored by the big soda companies, there's basically a ad that's like less is more, basically, which talks about maybe drinking a little less soda, but just really pushing it on move more.
Wow.
And when you look at it, it's crazy, right? Because you go by these bodegas and you have these big ads targeting these young kids, but the communities are barely walkable. There's not that many green spaces. It's just saying move more. At the end of the day, let's be honest, right? And this is, I think it's Dan Lieberman has been putting a lot of good stuff out this on he wrote his recent book, Exercise. Nobody wants to work out. Why? What is the evolutionary benefit? What is, right? You want to conserve energy, you want to survive in the short term, and you want to reproduce.
Right.
And Lord knows every day I wake up, I want to conserve energy, I want to reproduce,
Right.
and I want to survive in the short term.
Same.
So it's like telling people that they got to move more. It's like, what?
Yeah.
It's just, again, it makes structural issues an individual choice. And that's fucked up.
Damn, I couldn't agree more. It's so true, especially for, like, you mentioned inertia, which is a term that I freaking love. That for somebody who's not already yet moving and like doesn't have like a fitness regimen, making starting one is like one of the most intimidating, most difficult things I think I can imagine for that person.
Yeah. I have something called exercise snacks that I actually seen has helped with people with that, because look, like,
Exercise snacks.
Tell
me about that.
Basically, it's this thought process. So I remember in 2013, I stumbled upon this study regarding diabetic patients or pre-diabetic patients, which is rampant in the US. And especially, I think we're seeing that right now with COVID. Like, by some estimates, 40% of deaths are from diabetic patients, who make up, 10% of the population. It's crazy.
Wow.
So with the thought process of exercise snacks, they saw, instead of one 30 to 40-minute session, they broke it up at the start of the day, at the end of the day, 2 15-minute exercise sessions. They made them snacks, and they realized it was actually better for their metabolic health, blood sugar, their health overall, than one long. So it seems that the body is more made for basically what's called intermittent movement consistently, rather than exercise as a big chunk, a meal. So I always was sitting on this idea. I was like, this makes so much sense. But I don't know, like, everybody, the industry at the time, I suppose, just wasn't ready or whatever. Lockdown happened. And then one of my clients, Naomi Campbell, wanted to work out all the time. And then one day we were doing it. She was like, oh, we should go on IG Live. And I'm like, well, I guess so. I'm not going to tell Naomi. No. So we hop on. And then people started to join. So basically, I created this like separate page called Exercise Snacks, which is basically making movement a movement. Where I created an exercise library that was short. Everything's less than 20 minutes. It's simple. There's seated things you could do. It's basically this thought process that people don't realize, is that consistent contracting of muscles to break up time goes a long way. So even some research shows, like, at 5 minutes of movement every 60 to 120 minutes of sitting offsets that and can still help improve your metabolic health. So the thing then becomes, if we're not overwhelmed by the thought that all our workouts have to be hard, let's not even think about workouts like that, because we've overlooked one key metric. You work out for fitness, you work out for performance, but nobody was talking about working out for health, right? Like, say mobility-based work, just moving your body, calf pumps while you sit, simple things like that. So if we could help improve that concept, then and keep it short, then does it become easier to say, okay, maybe I'll start eating a little bit better because I don't have, the cognitive fatigue of hard workouts, especially at first. Can I focus on my sleep? My thing is this, whether you want to look at, James Clear or the Zen Habits guy, I think Leo, it's how do you stack things and make it as easy as possible to flow through, so it's health by design. And I think when you put all the emphasis on one area, it's too overwhelming. Why? And it takes too long to see the benefits, from at least aesthetically, from workouts, unless you go very hard very soon, which most people can't do.
Yeah. I mean, what are some other things that you can do in that 15-minute, like, as an exercise snack? Calf raises, like seated.
It depends if it's seated or not. But when you look at it, right, look at it 3 ways. So there's also something called peripheral circulation technique, which is basically when you just combine the upper body and lower body exercise, it creates a better circulation through the body.
Wow.
So the easiest way to think about it, if you want to make a 15-minute workout session, an upper body exercise, a lower body exercise, a core exercise, and something just super cardio focused, right? You have 4 exercises, do them for 30 seconds to 1 minute, cycle through it 3 to 5 times. And then you're good. And then at night, kind of say, if you want to go through, or in the morning, a mobility work, something to ease you down into your day. So that workout at night really just becomes, say, part of your sleep time routine, wind down routine. Now you're sleeping better. It flows into each other. And then think about actually working in what we call standard exercise or fitness into your week. And for most people, they overdo it. Like, I'm big into minimum effective dosages, especially if you're busy. You really only need to do max 2 HIIT sessions per week for minimum effective dosage. And to be honest, you get 1 true strength session in, and then you get some low to medium intensity, just kind of consistent cardio if you can, right? And that becomes so much easier. Now you're feeling better, and look at it like this. Your body then just processes everything better, right? Your metabolic state becomes better, your blood pressure drops, your resting heart rate drops. If you work out at the right times, it's easier to go to sleep. How do things flow into each other instead of looking at them segmented? And I think as I've aged and the people who I've worked with, has become key, because there is so much kind of wasted time in between, let's say, those periods. And I look at life as a class, right? It's in college, what I had to do was make the best flow of a class schedule because I knew I had other things going on. And I think if we do the same with our life, it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, dude, what you're saying is so brilliant, and it's particularly relevant to me because I told you I haven't worked out. I haven't gone to the gym in 2 weeks, 3 weeks at this point. And so I love the idea of these short, exercise snacks. Really, really smart. And so when it comes to then, I feel like I've heard you on a podcast previously talking about when it comes to diet, you're more interested in like, I don't know if I'm phrasing this the right way, but the things that people can add in as opposed to what they, become obsessed with taking out of their diets. Or did I have that the right way, or did I flip it?
You're right. It's like inclusion instead of exclusion. I think with everything, because the thing becomes, it's not what I'm not. My thing is this: if I tell you to do something, that would reduce your likelihood of not doing something that you shouldn't be doing. So instead of telling a kid, not to say we're kids, but instead of telling a kid, oh, you can't do that. What if I told the kid they could do something else, and then all of a sudden they either reduce or stop doing the thing they shouldn't be doing? So, and even if I would tell a client, okay, you can't eat this anymore, they're automatically going to ask, well, what can I eat? So instead of this situation with food where we always want to go, oh, you should never eat this, you should only eat raw foods, or you should only eat meat, or only do this, that. I think it's all crazy, and more respect to them, but like, you got everybody from, carnivore diets, paleo that's protein focused, to paleo that's carb focused, to vegan, to raw vegan, to some people who say they don't eat, they just breathe.
Yeah, breatharians.
Yeah, I'm like, the fuck is going on? So my thing is also keeping it real and be like, yo, what if you just included this, see what works, and it creates kind of also a little bit of elimination diet without it being eliminating in the sense of the mind. So that, because then later, if we want to add in that food again, then you have a better idea of how the person responds. But I don't think people do well with restriction. And I take that from kind of a public health perspective too, because you also see people often make beneficial changes when they're incentivized, not when they're penalized. So, life is hard enough. Like, I got to tell somebody that they can't do something again. It's like, hold up, what if you just ate a few more fruits and vegetables, or, you got more water into the day? It's a crazy stat. Like, only 12% of the US population gets enough fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
And that's off that's off the food pyramid, which is basically just a commodity structure. So who knows if we actually need more? And it's crazy stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't like to do it from a reductionist view.
Yeah. I think it's always more, there's just a more positive sort of morale to when you like have to add stuff to your diet, as opposed to feeling like you're embracing a diet from a place of restriction.
Yeah, I think you got to make things a game. Like, you got to gamify. Yeah, you got to gamify existence to a second. And then you start to notice when you're including certain foods, typically energy levels start to improve, things like that. And especially I work with a lot of models in my day, they had such a negative relationship with food.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, the hell is going on? Like, they were told so often what they couldn't eat. And it's hyper in that world, but it's still kind of the same. And my thing was like, let me help people understand what they can eat, and then make the decision for them once they want to formulate like their eating kind of design practice as it pertains. But to talk in absolutes, I think, is an affront to science. It's not science, it's scientism. It's different. So I can't.
Dude, I love that. It's so true. Yeah, I feel like, and there's a lot of these like zealots online, whether it's the carnivore dieters or, some of the, you're plant-based, but you don't strike me as like somebody who's like trying to push the way that you eat onto other people.
No.
But there is a lot of that absolutism in
it sells
in the wellness world. Yeah.
It sells. Like, my thing is this, and I'm gonna be honest. I made a very I made a very deliberate decision in the beginning of my career that while I turned this into a living, it's also still a passion project. It's human experimentation to an extent. And the way I would make my money would not simply be the same as how I share my thoughts, my theories, how it pertains to health and wellness. Other people don't have that luxury. I luckily work with a lot of other companies and brands and other projects that are fortunate to pay my bills. But if there's a situation where you in a polarized time, everything is connected to a thought process that eventually then turns into some sort of money, whether that's PragerU, whether that's InfoWars, whatever, it turns into a money scheme. So that's really what's unfortunate when it comes to health, that health has become a monetary scheme, whether that be with, what's his name? I mean, Asprey is an easy one, but there's also, Mark who did he was like the father of paleo, first brought that along. He sold it for tens of millions of dollars.
Mark Sisson?
Yeah. All of them, it's connected to a product. So the thing becomes, and I think as the industry ages, it's like, I don't have an issue if you're connecting it with a product, if you teach people to critically think, right? Like you wrote a book. So if somebody takes the time to read that book and supports you for reading that book, that's very much different than somebody say telling you that here's the way. All right. And also here's my supplement. Here's this, here's that. So I think it's as a responsibility to like teach people to critically think, like to be open. And the thing, if you take a hard line early on, you can't change it later. Which kind of fucks you up.
Yeah.
So
there's some of these like carnivore guys now who I won't name them, but they start. I literally had some of them on my podcast who, the first time they came on my podcast were like they didn't eat anything but meat, beef, salt, and water, and now they're promoting that they've basically like done a 180, and now they're basically just doing like a modified paleo diet, and they're still calling it like they're eating fruits.
I'll call him out. What's his name's like that? Paul Sedino or whatever, who went the stuff he put, the remembering. I'm like, come on, bro. Sean Baker, when he tries to do those TikToks where he's just going at these guys. I'm like, it's the same pathology that vegan dude you're making fun of and yours. And it's just like, why are we at the end of the day, why are we doing this? You can't say it's because you're trying to improve health or do this or do that. You are making a lot of money off of this, off of these exaggerated claims. And it's problematic because, again, look at anything, right? Remember when we thought the atom was the plum pudding model? Remember when the dude who the theory of evolution was that a giraffe had a long neck because it was trying to reach its leaves? Yeah. Everybody at a time thought what they were saying was the most valid thing. And for us at this point to do this at a time when there truly is a public health crisis, there truly is, and not just bringing up these things just for some sort of self-serving adulation and to be noble and to say everybody's talking about vaccines, but nobody's talking about metabolic health. It's like, all right, hold up. What are you doing? What are you doing? Not just to change the conversation around you. So hopefully you might get on a Joe Rogan show or something. What are you doing to actually make a difference, right? And I think that's what becomes important. And I'm not trying to throw stones or anything. I mean, I suppose I could be a lot more bigger if I just really took those stances. But I'm just saying, like, what if at the end of the day, we all just put aside our seeming differences and we said, yo, like, we all are intelligent in some capacity. Let's try to figure this problem out. Let's honestly try to figure this problem out, even if we have to start small. And that, I just think that, like, I don't know, those sparring just to spar, it's like, why?
Dude, it's, I'm glad you said it. It's definitely a problem. And I don't have anything against any one individual person. I think I actually am very entertained by Sean Baker and
it's funny. I laugh.
Yeah. And, but I agree that sometimes the motivations can be obfuscated by the fact that, like, it just seems that that sometimes they aim to be inflammatory just for the sake of being inflammatory, or for getting attention, or for, furthering their products, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah. And, you put it with a nice hashtag, you got Vicurious, which actually I kind of respect David, for doing a little bit, but it's just like, it's like adult TikTok. You know what I mean? It's like we all each have our little dance that we're trying to get other people to do the same dance. And I don't really get it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Who do you think's doing it well? Who are some other people that you respect?
Who's doing it well in the industry? There's a guy. I'm been super into actually like how people are approaching the COVID problem, and there's this doctor out of Harvard who's been really interesting with the. I can't remember his name, but he's been really interesting with the way he's been approaching both the vaccine and the testing strategy. He doesn't think that we have the testing strategy properly figured out in the U.S.
There's a guy, Jay Bhattacharya at Harvard. Is that
Oh,
the guy?
him too.
Maybe. Yeah,
That's a
he's
different
good.
guy though. I've always liked how the founder of Precision Nutrition does it. I think he open sources his information really well. His name escapes me right now. I often look at a lot of guys in the performance world, like because since they deal with athletes and sport, they can't. Even the dude at Apex, Bobby Stroop, who does work with Patrick Mahomes, it's like because their work is so tied into athlete development, which is often grounded in nutrition and physical world, they don't have to do hyperbole. Like they just have to produce results, and then they open source the information to hopefully let you know what's working. But I would love, and I would continue to look, but I would love to see that more on like a public health level, which I haven't completely seen. But there is also the guy who's doing, he did a TED talk on brain health and how he's doing brain scans.
Daniel Amen?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been super intrigued by him. And then I've been digging into triage theory by Dr. Ames a bit, which has changed the way I'm looking at kind of mineral and vitamin supplementation slightly. But yeah, I mean, I'm either in like PubMed or I'm super into kind of performance sport world.
Yeah, I love that. Damn, man.
What about you? What are you interested in right now?
Well, having just come off of my COVID experience, I'm just trying to get back to like my own shit, like my own routine. Like, I haven't been able to work out in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So I'm honestly just my focus has really been on myself for the past 3 weeks is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I mean, I like to expose myself to as broad an array of perspectives as I can, and to form my own sort of opinion about things. I also take into account like data and research, but I also, there are definitely people who, I like to follow people who are like heterodox, meaning they don't really toe party lines, and kind of just form like a stew in my brain of like all these different perspectives. And that's sort of like, for the past couple of weeks, at least for me, has been really just like, thinking about COVID and thinking about, the vaccine stuff, just because it's what I personally have been dealing with. But beyond that, I mean, from a nutrition standpoint, I mean, I really value what you were saying about like absolutism. I continue, like, I don't think that my views have really changed that much from that side of things. I still continue to really be convinced that properly raised animal products, whole colorful plants, that that both really are sort of optimal from the standpoint of not just physical performance, but for long-term health, brain health, cardiovascular health, and the like. And yeah, and I just, that's pretty much it. I mean, no major revelations, which I think is actually like a good thing.
Yeah, I think so too. What do you feel like? I'm interested on your take on plants. Like, where do you sit on this whole anti-nutrient concept?
I think I actually don't think about them. I mean, I think legumes are a wonderful source of protein, fiber. I don't think that they're as high quality as like a lean chicken breast or or a whole egg. But I'm not averse to legumes. I'm almost every day I consume a salad that has white beans in it and has kale in it. Oh my God, like two of the things that like
Gonna kill you.
That are gonna kill you. In the context of a balanced, and balanced in air quotes, because I know that balanced has sort of been, the term has been bastardized by like what did you call the food pyramid?
It's a commodities business.
Yeah. No, but I mean, in the context of a diet that has a diverse array of animal proteins and whole plants, I think it's splitting hairs to worry about anti-nutrients. And also, but when you prepare them, when you cook them, you're deactivating most of them anyway. I think that for somebody who is healthy, who has a robust, microbiome, a healthy immune system. I think that these kinds of plant toxins are going to strengthen the system.
Have you heard of that? Have you heard of that theory? It's basically that the reasons why plants are good for us is because they're actually trying to kill us slightly.
Yeah.
it's like
I'm pretty familiar.
Super
Yeah.
eustress energy. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I just don't. I guess everybody's just kind of splitting hairs.
Yeah, well, think about like exercise. Exercise is good for you because it's bad for you. It's a form of stress, right? That if you were to do constantly, for 16 hours a day, it would kill you ultimately. Sitting in a sauna.
Yeah.
I was in a sauna yesterday that was literally at the same temperature that I use to slow roast ribs. So you're literally cooking yourself, okay?
Yeah.
And it's good for you because it's bad for you in a way. So that whole concept of like hormesis, environmental hormesis, I'm a huge fan. And I think the same thing is true for plants and xenohormesis or whatever, whatever the term is. Symbiotic phytoadaptation is what Mark Hyman calls it, which I think is actually quite a beautiful way to think about it. That when you consume a plant, whether it's a wild plant or an organic plant or even a conventionally raised plant, it has phytochemicals in it that were developed by the plant to ensure its survival, and that vigor, that robustness gets passed down to you when you eat it, which I think is like the most beautiful, cool thing. Why would anybody want to like subvert that and throw that away?
Trying to pad their accounts, I guess.
There you go. Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
If you are eating the appropriate amount of calories, you're exercising properly, and you're noticing strange body fat storage patterns, it could be a hormonal issue.